The last candied anchors were already dissolving by the time the skin of Teeth's bow nosed into the eddy. The pylons bled a final hiss of citric vapor before they cracked apart, slabs toppling into the boiling green end, vanishing in a flare of foam. They were out of staging points now. Ahead lay the last stretch, a direct sprint to the cliff-docked elevator that loomed above the far shore like a spine of stone and steel. Beyond that, highland plateaus where the guild had never bothered to rule. Safe land, open trade, and the promise of breaking Vexor's long-held isolation. Behind them, the convoy rippled forward, weaving through its own knitted wake corridor so tightly that spray from one hole fell onto the baffles of the next. Each pilot watched the vents ahead and the signals from Mara's mast flag, the beats of a song they had learned in weeks of midnight drills. The guild wasn't done yet. 3 attack skimmers, smaller and faster, darted in from the starboard horizon, armed this time not with destabilers, but with nets wide-weighted meshes, designed to foul baffles or drag panels past their sacrificial support points. "They've stopped trying to kill us," Rook observed grimly from the forward deck. "Now, they just want to cripple us enough to haul us back." "They can't catch the whole line," Mara said, still calm. "Only the leader." Rook shot her a look he'd learned to distrust. "What are you thinking? That the leader's job isn't to be safe," she said. "It's to be seen." When the first skimmer swung into intercept range, the skin of Teeth broke formation. Gasps rippled down the cum line as Mara drove her ship out of the braided corridor straight across Astal churning vent seam where the pH was savage and the heat shimmered the air. The skimmer, hungry for the kill, followed. It was everything Mara wanted. The baffles screamed as the ocean tried to eat alive whatever dared to cross that seam, but their mouths were still wide, still matched to the pulse of the vent. Every savage bite of acid turned into thrust and power. The skin leaped forward like a thing freed from gravity, dragging the skimmer right into a storm. It didn't understand. An arc of steam swallowed both hulls. When it cleared, the skimmer was half melted, listing its net fouled in its own wake. "Leads clear," Mara called, and wheeled back into the convoy corridor in time for the final sprint. The far cliffs rose sharp now, carved by centuries of acidic spray into twisted black teeth. Above Theovator's, Cason cradled its docking bays, mechanisms clanking as ground crews scrambled to prep for revels they'd hardly believed were possible an hour ago. For this last push, baffles flared open, last feedstock valves were uncapped. "Generators," screamed Redline. The speed was brutal. The acid ocean, so good at pulling prey down and apart, became for these impossible moments a wind at their backs. And then, with less drama than anyone expected, the skin of Teeth's bow met the elevator's reception cradle. Arresting hooks caught. The hull shuddered to stillness. Foam and steam curled past. Harmless no against the layered docking plates. The wake corridor collapsed behind them as the baffles closed. Ocean rushed back in to reclaim what had been stolen. But the convoy was already locked in place, each hull in turn slamming Hummagan's berth, pilots yelling, crews laughing or crying into their COM. It wasn't one cheer that rose from the cliffs, it was dozens, scattered, sharp, each one a signal fire. Families reunited mid-gangway. Traders fell to their knees. One crewman kissed the dock steel, so hard lost a tooth, ARO stepped out from the skin of Teeth's crow's nest and dipped both hands into the condensation trace along the pier. They brought up 2 cupped palms of clear water, cooling runoff from the baffle captures. They drank it without flinching. "You promised," they said to Mara. "You kept it." Mara only smiled. The guild's mainland overseer was there on the high platform, flanked by aides and contract muscle. They stared down at the moored convoy, faces unreadable, but they didn't move to block disembarkation. Not now, with half the shoreline seeing live feeds, and the cum nets flooded with still frames of Theway corridor and anchor pylons in action. "You've undone a century of control in a single day," the overseer said, when Mara climbed to meet them. "I've published everything already," Mara replied. "Every schematic, every reaction flow, every map. You can't pretend it doesn't work. You've destabilized this world." Mara looked past them to where crews were swapping water casks across hulls in a market born in realtum. "No," she said. I stabilized us against you." The overseer didn't answer. Maybe they understood. Maybe they were calculating how long before their own people turned lemon boats into commerce and profit without the guild's chokehold. Either way, Mara knew. She'd already won because the recipe was out. The next foam cycle changed everything. The first independently built braided crossings happened almost immediately. Some craft had mixed results. Baffle, timing was an art, but even partial successes proved the principle. Vexari coastal towns began carving pylons. Inland cities sent engineers to learn the lemonade dance from Maraskru, redrew themselves overnight. With the crossings came exchanges of language, food, invention. Vent's desert plant became a high-value export. In turn, human crops from orbital farms found their first true foothold on Vhexer soil. Stories crossed even faster than goods. The guild didn't collapse outright. Old institutions rarely do, but their grip softened into something more like grasping. And in those loosened fingers, entire generations slipped away toward the horizon. Months later, Mara stood again at the same cliff where she had watched Arrow's toy boat hesitate over the edge. Now the sea below was alive with motion sail shapes of 100 designs. Holes, gleaming with citrus yellow or matte black reactive stone. Slender pylons marking crossings on regular schedules. Rook joined her. Hands finally healed, though the scars made his grip look like cracked porcelain. He asked. "Stopping's not the point," she said. "The point's making sure they don't forget how to start." Below them, one lemon boat hit a vent at perfect timing, its baffles flaring in synchrony. The wake behind it caught the rising sun and flashed green gold for a heartbeat, like someone had stirred the whole Oceanento lemonade. Rook grinned. "Looks like they're linning." Mara just breathed in the wind. Rust, lightning, citrus, and let the sight settle deep. She didn't need statues. She didn't need a seat in anyone's hall of heroes. The ocean would keep the memory. Every hiss of reaction, every smooth-cut corridor through the foam was a reminder that Samia once had stood at the edge of the impossible and decided to change the terms in the years to come. Vexari and humans alike kept a phrase. It wasn't exactly proverb, wasn't exactly boast. They used it when the only way forward looked lethal, when the environment itself seemed rigged against survival. And when they meant to go anyway, they called it lemonading, not just turning danger to advantage, but making the hazard itself the engine of escape. And when new travelers made their first crossing and asked where the name came from, they were told the story of a stubborn human who looked at an untouchable ocean, tasted its poison in the air, and said, "I think it just needs the right recipe. If you'd like, I can now package the entire part's IVI narrative into a single, clean document." So Yahave, the full HFY novella, ready to read without breaks. The skin of Teeth sat in dry dock, wearing her damaged like metals. Every missing baffle, every pitted spar, every melted bracket was an index of a battle fought with the world itself and won. Barely. That was why the guild hadn't moved against her directly yet. They were waiting for the story to fade, for this miracle run to stay rumor, an anecdote, instead of becoming the kind of proof that inspires others to build their own. Mara wasn't going to give them that time. "We don't cross just once," she told the crowded slipyard that now smelled of citrus, steam, and tool oil. "We take everyone who wants to go." The murmur rolled back and forth among shipwrights, fisher captains, gutter-smart kids, and even a few local traders whose fortunes had always been penned in by the acid ocean. The Vexari governor was a notable absence. The guild spies were a notable presence. "A convoy?" Rook asked from her side. His new glove gauntlets hiding bandages that still seeped under pressure. "Not just a convoy," Mara said. "A braided convoy. We link hulls together with staggered baffles so dissolution from one feeds the wake for the next, and the whole thing moves as one animal. If a panel fails, the line closes ranks." Ven tilted their head, ears twitching. "It will be longer than your safe wake corridor." "Which is why we prime the route," Mara said, stabbing a finger at the map pinned to the bulkhead. "Anchors here, here, and here. 3 chains of pylon islands bleeding sweet into Thekel zones. We rotate the convoy through them like dancers, through staging marks. Everything's timed Tovan cycles and foam tides." One of the older fisher captains frowned. "Means you've got exactly the fuse you think you do." If you're late 3 minutes, you die, Mara finished. If you're early, you burn feedstock and arrive empty. So we're not late, and we're not early. It was insane. It was glorious. It was the kind of plan only humans tried. Lean into chaos, bet everything go in rhythm, and dare the enemy to keep up. They worked for 9 foam cycles. Entire workshops sprouted where guild authority had always kept industry stunted. Families carved hulstrum, scavenged ceramic and carbon lattice. Old cargo skiffs were cut down and rebuilt as bite boats with layered baffles. The first generation of trainee wake captains learned to read Mara's pH charts. The Wainovators once learned to read stars. Vent's people carved the candied anchors from holestone. Others ferried them under tarp at night to drop points, dropping them section by section into the acid with winches wrapped in sacrificial rope. The guild tried to interfere, cutting supply lines, confiscating shipments, declaring public safety inspections that lasted all day. But sheer scale worked against them. You can't choke 100 slipways at once, not when the entire shoreline is converting their porches into boat sheds. When a Union-built barge inexplicably caught fire and burned to alloy in the yard, Rook looked at Morand, said, "They're scared." "Not scared enough," she replied. Dawn, on the day of the gambit, came in twin sun gold, clouds shredded by a steady offshore wind. The convoy floated in the inlet like a patient animal, linked by cords of reactive mesh and heavy cable. More than 200 souls aboard. Every ship carried a pilot, a baffle crew, and one or two non-combat passengers allowed only if they could swap panels in an emergency. Aro stood beside Mara in the skin of Teeth's crow's nest, the toy boat strapped in its place of honor. "All the way this time?" they asked. "All the way," Mara promised. "And not just us." They launched on the breath between 2 vent pulses, the instant of calm before the first giant inhale. The baffles unfurled in a ripple along the line, silver-green foam curling away from each mouth as the convoy began to move. For the first league, it was poetry. Panels flexed in perfect sync, their chemical wakes braiding into Oninether-like muscles in a single stride. Candied anchors rose ahead in timed sequence, each one leading its gift into the sea. At every pillared island, teams leaped across narrow planks to swap baffles, dump exhausted feedstock, and shove off in one rehearsed motion. Even the guilds. Spotter drones seemed unsure until the south horizon began to move. They came in low and fast. Guild attack skimmers, hulls sharp and black, throwing wakes meant to tangle the convoy's rhythm. Over loudhailers, they blasted safety orders for all vessels to return to Portiander Guild escort. Nobody turned. The first wave pushed in hard from portside. Mara saw their lead skimmer nose into the outer curve off the wake corridor, and immediately stagger as the laminar smoothness collapsed to chaos beneath them. They'd underestimated how precisely tuned the wake braid was to the convoy's shape. "Let them try again," she told Rook. "They're learning there's no room in a recipe for freeloaders." But the guild hadn't brought just small craft. Over the vent line rise ahead, the shape of an ironclad carrier hove into view, hull big enough to carry supplies for a siege. It cut across the convoy's intended path and began dropping something into the water, heavy, glinting ballast. "Alkali siege droppers," Rook said grimly. "They'll foam us faster than we can bleed it out." Mara's voice went flat. "Then we feed them instead." It was the move she'd sketched weeks ago and sworn she'd only use if there was no other choice. "Signal the middle third," she told the runners on the come line. "Flood secondary rhines now." The reaction in those mid-convoy holes tripled instantly. The dissolution cloud poured into the wake, not forward but surging sideways toward the ironclad's position. Baffles half melted in seconds, but the sudden flood of reactive chemistry churned the ironclad's alkali plumes into brittle, salt-slick masses that collapsed under their own weight. The monster had been forced to swallow a cake hole, and it gagged. The skin of teeth surged forward into the opening at the front of the line. "Last candied anchors ahead," Ven shouted from below. "They're on a timer," Mara said. "We either hit that window or the ocean hits us." The skin of teeth moved like no vessel that had ever touched the acid ocean, not skimming, not plowing, but letting the hungry water eat in pre-agreed bites. Every dissolution beat turned into motion, every hiss of chemistry into charge. From the crow's nest, Mara, could see the wake trail unroll behind them in a long ghost green ribbon laminar, whisper calm in the middle, its edges fizzing where the monster of the sea tried to rush back in. The cliffs of Kerith were already shrinking to jagged teeth on the horizon. The crowd's noises faded into hiss and hum of reactions. The baffles worked perfectly. In the first surge, vent heat hit them like furnace breath, strips flexed open, and the hull leaped forward with a speed that made Ruach laugh out loud in disbelief. "Wake corridors as smooth as oil," he called up. "She's eating like a queen today." "Don't jinx her," Mara said, scanning the pH readouts. They were matching cycle forecasts down to the decimal. Every upspike met with a wider bite. Every EB answered with a sip. The ocean was still trying to kill them, but the rhythm was more dance than duel. They hit the first candied anchor on schedule, a basalt-bright pylon jutting above the foam, bleeding yellow smoke where its reactive stone met the surface. Mara eased them alongside. Below, the tinker stassed weighted sacks of Vens plant citrate into storage bins and swapped out the first set of half-dissolved panels for fresh. They shoved off within minutes. Timing to the start of the next vent pulse, that was when the sky began to change. Thin silver clouds had been building low on the horizon since dawn, easy to ignore until they tore open and spilled a sheen of metallic drizzle. Where it met the ocean, the rain didn't slow. It accelerated reactions, spurring unpredictable foaming. Mara's pulse ticked up. Rain meant hard mode. Any pH map shed charted would be corrupted by thousands of tiny, chaotic inputs. "Wasn't on the forecast," Rook shouted, throwing a waterproof over the nearest junction box. "Forecasts for harbors," Mara replied. "We're not anywhere the guild bothers to track." The first big wave of chaos hit at the mid-crossing mark. The temperature sensors on the starboard baffles flared red, reading vent peak heat when they were meant to be idling in a calm basin out-offer them. The self-regulators yawned open too far, too fast. The hull lurched forward. Strain singing through the scaffolds. Starboard 4 and 5 pull back, Mara ordered. "They're already chewed halfway through their base rails," Ven yelled from below. "If I pull 'em now, they'll shred." That much extra dissolution meant losing structure. But leaving them in meant overthrust, burning their stored feedstock before they had the safe leeway to reload. "Dump them," Mara said. Her gut hated it. Every pylon, every baffle, was days of work with a story embedded in it. "We can't carry a runaway tooth." The rails released. The two panels twisted away into the ocean's embrace, vanishing in a flare of steam and hiss. The hulls pitch steadied, reaction heat dropping back to tolerable, but the loss cut their thrust line almost in half. Rook checked the current profile. Sheltering basins still 2,000 meters ahead. At this speed, went rains. Jacking the chemistry, he didn't finish the sentence. "We're not limping in," Mara said. "We're sprinting. If we burn the backup cells now, we can reach the anchor before they're empty." Ben stared up, and if they burn out, early Mara's jaw tightened. "Then we don't." They pushed harder than was sane. The generators, fed by the surviving baffles, pushed charge into thililiary drive faster than it could bleed into motion. Rook vented heat in short, violent bursts, each one throwing a veil of steam across the ocean that hid them from the guild. Drones shadowing at high altitude for 5 heartbeats. Mara thought they'd make it clean. The microchannels inside it weren't flexing closed anymore. The acid tore. And like a blade through fruit, structural loss started to spiral toward the main hull. "I've got it," Rook said, already tying himself off to the main ladder. He moved low and fast, a coil off-replacement mesh in his arms. The wind swung hard. Mara tracked his motion between foaming bursts that clawed at the hull. Even from the crow's nest, she saw the skin on his fingers whiten from chemical burn as he slapped the mesh over the breach, clamping it down with acid-bitten wrenches. He finished the job and staggered back, gloves trailing steam, before they stiffened into ruin on his hands by the time Ven hauled him into shelter. The smell of cooked cloth filled the air. "Still with me?" Mara called. "Hurts like hell," Rook said through his teeth. "But if we make it, I get to say I punched the ocean and it blinked." They made the anchor with 6% charge left and 3 functioning baffles. The anchor itself weighs, sagging from exposure, the sweet bleed had kept it alive just long enough. As they latched in, the hull groaned under them. They swapped panels fast, every motion practiced now. Mara counted heads twice, eyes flicking to Aro, who stubbornly occupied their same corner. Still dry? She asked, still watching. The child said, the last leg was worse. The rain intensified, carrying with it not just enhanced reaction rates but glittering motes of something that clung to exposed surfaces. The tinkerer's sensors pinged heavy. Metal contamination, byproduct from deep vent mining upstream. It spiked the sea's appetite and ate through the fresh baffles twice as the delicate braid route Mara had plotted collapsed into shredded threads. That was when she saw the silver knot of guild skimmers in the distance. Too far to intercept, to closado, ignore. They dumped ballast and churned the surface in strategic patches, shearing waves across potential wake corridors. Sabotage again. This time out in the open. Her crew cursed them in a medley of languages. Mara just kept her eyes on the stretch between the Mond, the dark line of the far shore. There was still room to win, but not the way they were going. We cut south into vent line 14, she said, finally. That'll take us into triple vent boil, Ven said flatly. I know, Mara said. If we keep the vents feeding hard and even, the guild can't destabilize the wake without killing themselves in it. And at that heat, our generators will overfeed. We can dump that power into the final sprint and the hull. Rook asked. She looked at the gauges, at the meters, at the faces around her. She melt like sugar in teeth. Rook spat over the rail. Sweet teeth, then. The ocean went white when they hit the triple vent convergence. Heat slammed into the hull, steam towered on both sides. The baffles yawned open like the jaws of great lizards, chewing at the flood-off reaction with manic appetite. Generator needles spiked dangerously high. Alarms howled. The crews wheated under their suits, but they moved, faster than they'd ever gone. The guild skimmers tried once to follow and broke off almost immediately. One hull lost a chunk to Throil and limped backward, trailing foam by the time the far shore's cliffs rose before them. The skin of teeth was groaning like an old tree in storm wind. Baffles reduced to stubs, deck plating pitted like lunar regolith. In the last 100 meters, they poured every scrap of stored energy into the drive, the wake corridor flaring into a phosphorescent arrow that carried them all the way to the landing lock. When they scraped into dock, there was no cheer, just stunned silence from the gathered crowd, broken by the sound of rain on metal and a single small voice. You brought the water, Aro said, cupping a handful scooped from the wake's tail. They held it up. Clear, cool condensation beaded. In their palm, safe to touch, safe to drink. For 2 cycles after the failed test, Mara barely left it. The burned, pitted husk of the barge sat on cradles nearby, its hull still scarred with the signature puff patterns of sabotage. She had made no formal complaint, not yet. Anyone with eyes and a bit of chemistry could see what had been done to them. But dragging the guild into court now was just another way to bury the work under procedure. Better to make something they couldn't kill quietly. Rook was already at the long bench. When Mara came in, tapping data from the sabotaged reaction channels onto his tablet, 3 lines cut with the same blade, he said. Precision job. They meant for Ito fail halfway enough to prove the ocean can't be persuaded. The Vexari tinkerers stood over a pile of replacement rinds, their huge black fingertips sorting crystal Cinto jars. One of them, Ven, held up a dusty yellow shard. From my own fields, they said, plant bleeds into the soil, makes it unkind to the acid rains. Lasts longer than your lemons. Mara took the shard, turned it over in her hand. It glittered under the coil light. Not just deterrent, but potential, bleeds it slowly. Yes, Ven said, when the rain is strong, it bleeds faster. The plant survives storms this way. Rook's hand stilled over his tablet. That's reactive pacing. Old Earth cousin to some desert seeds that only germinate in flood conditions. Mara felt the click in her brain, the moment when scattered facts suddenly hold hands and bow to each other. Oh, she said softly. That's the part we've been missing. That afternoon, she gathered the workshop crew, Aro included. The child had refused to leave since Thetis, haunting the corners with their toy boat, occasionally offering brutally practical suggestions. Tie Thuffum down had been their latest. They leaned forward now, interested. Here's the thing, Mara began, drawing on the wall slate. In part 1 of this little epic, we thought about neutralizing the ocean enough to let us through. Works for a few lengths, but then you're out of juice. In part 2, we tried feeding it in a measured way, letting it digest just enough of our haul to pay for the ride. But the sabotage proved something important. Our pacing was wrong. She drew a spiral wave. We thought constant feed was stability, but the ocean isn't constant. It runs in pulses, storms, vents, chemical tides. When the environment changes, we need our reaction to moach. That's what Ven's plant does. Bleeds faster when the storm's stronger. Rook nodded slowly. Dynamic baffles. Dynamic, Mara echoed. Panels that sense pH change and open more channels under stress. Slow to atrical when the sea's sleepy, self-regulating. And, ... she grinned. ... we make the dissolution. Itself, unenergy harvest. Eat, move, steer, rinse, repeat. Aro raised their hand like it was school. So the boat eats the ocean, but only bites when the ocean bites. Exactly, Mara said. You're making a mouth, Ven said, pleased. The next weeks were a fever dream of creation. They built lemonade baffles, long, fin-like panels, layered with porous stone, doped with Thiedsert plant citrates, and earth citrus analog mix. Micro-channel lattice spiraled inside, opening and closing with the flex of a bimetal strip that responded to heat spikes from the exothermic reaction. Each baffle was a digestive tract for the ocean, and the waste. Heat was fed into solid state, generatorsinistoled between the catamaran hulls. Mara scrapped the guild's flat barge entirely. The new craft christened Skin of Teeth by Rook Wassel, angles and gaps. 2 needle holes connected by carbon scaffold that looked like it couldn't possibly serve a storm. That was the point. Most of what crossed the ocean would be removable, replaceable, designed to be eaten. They kept the control cabin small and high above the reaction line, more like a lookout's crow's nest to Knobridge. Everything beneath it existed to disappear at a chosen time. Once, during a wind-lashed calibration day, Aro ran phosphor paced along the side of one baffle and stepped back to watch the slow curls of yellow dissolve into the green sea. It's like painting on the ocean, they murmured. Just remember, Mara said, the ocean's the kind of gallery that eats the art. The first real trial they staged far from the guild's usual watch points, a friendly fisher clan, towed Skin of Teeth to an inlet where vent maps showed pH, tides breathing in and out like the lungs of a god. Below, Rook and the Tinkerers eased the first set into the water. Instantly, the acidic surface boiled, and then calmed, the reaction layer smoothing into a luminous trail behind them. Meters ticked upward, not just thrust, but clean. Wake corridor holding, bring her around into the vent cycle. The sea's breath changed, hotter updrafts, painting the horizon with faint chrome vapor. The baffles flexed, microchannels yawning wider under the heat. Flow rates doubled. Generator. Output surged. Look at her go, Rook yelled over the hiss. She's feeding harder when it's nastier. That's the dance, Mara called back. They rode the vent surge for 2 kilometers before peeling back into calmer water, the baffles clossing their mouths to sips once more. When they cut the drive, Skin of Teeth drifted upright, entire and embowed. Rook whooped. One of the Tinkerers simply touched the hull like a blessing. Even Aro was uncharacteristically solemn. That, they said, looked like crossing. The test results were impossible to keep quiet. Within days, half of Kareth's human quarter had seen the phosphor bright wake oiling across the horizon. Rumors made it sound like she'd skipped the ocean entirely, flying on some black market union antimatter trick. The guild sent polite inquiries, then least polite ones. Mara ignored them all. Instead, she and Rook pored over the data mapping, a potential full crossing route. The acid Oceanwazen divans worst stretches were patchworks of vents, mineral patches, and deeper calm basins where the reaction rates slowed enough to stage repairs. With the baffles self-regulating, they could braid a path from vent to basin to vent, like stringing pearls through a storm. It'll mean timing everything to the foam cycle charts, Rook said. If we miss a surge, we stall in deadwater, and the ocean eats us cold. Then we don't miss, Mara said. We run it like choreography. Ven tapped a spot on the map. Here, candied anchors. Mara frowned. Explain. Tall pylons dropped ahead of time, made of pure, reactive stone, Ven said. Stand in the water, bleed slow until you come. You dock against one. Refill your feedstock, catch your breath. Ocean eats them in an hour once you leave. Mara considered it, like staging islands made of desert for a monster. Yes, Ven said seriously, sweet teeth. One evening, as she tightened the last mount on a baffle, Mara found Aro, perched nearby, silent. You're thinking long thoughts, she said. Aro's ears tilted toward the ocean. Everyone says you're dangerous, they said. Not because you might be, because you might not. Then everything changes. Mara sat back on her heels. Change scares people more than acid. Ero chewed their lip. If you leave, you teach others. That's the deal, Mara said simply. No secrets. The child nodded, as if concluding some difficult internal negotiation, and held out the battered toy boat. Put this on the new boat, so it knows it promised me water that doesn't hurt. Mara took it, the rough woodworm from Aro's hands, and fixed it to the inside of the crow's nest. Warnley crew would see a figurehead in reverse, guiding from within. At dawn on the day of the public crossing attempt, the skin of teeth loomed at the quay. Baffles folded closed like the petals of some strange night flower. The air tasted acidic but alive, a sure sign the Vencycles were moving to her forecast. Crowds lined the cliffs. Some waved, some scowled. Guild officials stood in a tight silver knot, watching. Mara took her place at the controls, Rook flanking. Her, Ven below, with the tinkerers. Aro sat cross-legged in the corner, eyes steady on the horizon. The Crossing Guild's building didn't look like a guild hall so much as a scar that had learned to take taxes. It hunched above. Kareth's central squared stone, slicked with hydrophobic glaze, gutters dripping neutralizer into quiet, hungry street drains. She hadn't expected ceremony of Exari usherskin modeled by old acid burns, turned glossy by caress-corded her, through a corridor of preserved relics, melted hull fragments displayed like heroic fossils, scorched charts annotated with disaster, a wall of names for those lost to foam. The message was clear. The ocean had a lobby, and it was funded. At the end of the corridor, a circular chamber opened under a skylight that tracked the twin suns. The Guild's council sat in concentric half-rings, their layered collars shadowing. Guild throats, wearing the bland expression of someone who'd traded conviction for Exis Longago, Captain Mara Ibar, the presiding counselor said, voice amplified by a harmonic throat phone that vibrated. Like a tuning fork. We know your species. We know your kind. You name risks like pets and Trito, teach them tricks. Mara stopped inside the marked line on the floorsome old ritual boundary. Respectfully, she said, hands at her sides, your maps are wrong. A ripple of disapproval passed through the half-rings, easily translated across. Species insolence. You requested audience to propose a crossing. She could feel her pulse in her gums. Yes, not by resisting the ocean, by using it. A drivethit feeds the sea to power itself. Controlled dissolution of sacrificial panels driving ion pumps. Suicide, someone hissed, Mara said, but not if done humanly. The presiding counselor leaned forward, collar plates whispering, explain humanly. Mara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. In my experience, other species treat environments like gods or enemies. They appease or avoid. Humans turn environments into systems. We find the levers, we accept cost, we choose where the pain lands, and we pay it to the ounce. We have profit, they said at last. We have safety. We carry goods around the ocean on air, at cost that keeps us fed and fed well. Your crossing threatens a balance. There it was, delivered without shame. Not an admission of fear, but of margins. Mara inclined her head. Your balance keeps half the planet looking at the other half like a rumor. I think I can start the work, Mara said, and share it openly. The human liaison shifted throat working. Several counselors murmured dopely. Their cartel muscles twitched at the word the way a soldier's twitches at ceasefire. The counselor's gill folds tightened. You may test once under guild. Observation, they said. Far from the port, with a vessel we choose, we purchase exclusive rights. Mara's laugh was short and bright. No, even the neutralizer vents seemed to hush. The human liaison stared at the floor, as if counting mouthfuls of career he could still save. "No," the counselor repeated, almost amused. "No exclusivity," Mara said. "Not yours, not mine. If I can cross, everyone can cross. If I can't, I shut up and learn. Those are the terms." "Your arrogance is human," someone said. "It's not arrogance," Mara said softly. "It's a design choice." They let her leave with a non-committal murmur that sounded like consent but felt like weather. Outside, the square's heat hit her like a breath from a kiln. She found the tinkerers from the cliffs waiting, along with Rukatek from her ship, whose hands never stopped rehearsing repairs. "Well," Rook asked. "They'll let us test," Mara said. Rook grinned. "That's 2 tries. We only need 1. They set to work. The test barge was a compromise. Guild hull, Mara's guts. The guild provided a flat-bottomed platform off ceramic composite heavy. Mara and her crew built the lemonade drive into its underside. Racks off mineral composite rinds that would dissolve at known rates. Microchannels for controlled reagent drip. Electrochemical pumps ready to harvest ion flow into thrust, and a bundle of capacitors that would ether feed the guidance fins or explode like a happy funeral. The trick wasn't surviving the acid nothing. Survived. The acid was choosing what died when and how hard it worked on its way out. Mara lost track of cycles. She woke in the workshop, cheek creased by a glide wrench. She slept on Thebarge, belly full of Karashans and sour fruit. The Vexari tinkerers brought her local analogs to citrates bitter, crystalline pellets harvested from desert plants that wept their own protection into the soil. Ruketched flow baffles with a laser stylus. Every part, a future scar. Pre-written so it could heal the shape they needed. Word spread. The square's staring people became a daily audience, then quiet collaborators. A grandmother in a scarf of oil-black cloth brought a sack of dried rind from her garden, then stayed to hold a light. 2 young porters sneaked out after shifts to polish the ceramic edges. Even the human liaison drifted past some nights, saying nothing, just watching with a frown heavy enough to be a prayer. On the morning of the test, the wind was wrong-gusty and wet, but the guild's observers were already at the cliffs, clipboards ready, and delay tasted like surrender. Mara looked over her crew. Rook bounced on the balls of his feet, nerves telegraphing through his shans. The Vexari tinkerers wore tight goggles that made their faces look turned inside out. Fielderly Child, from the first day, whose name Mara had learned, was Oro, stood with its toy boat Cluchetto its chest. "Stay up here today," she said to Oro. "Watch for our wake. Neutralizer nozzles checked and capped. The barge will carry none." That was the point. Rin secured, pumps primed. She took her station at the forward controls and made the only speech she believed in. "No speeches," she said. "We go, we learn. We'll come back." Rook snorted a laugh that broke a tension no prayer could have touched. The tide drew them toward Thege. The cliffs loomed, the ocean hissed, and the barge slid into the acid ocean with a sound like a steel file dragged across bone. For one stunned heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ocean woke. Foam licked at the hull's edges, testing, then tasting, then biting. The rinds began to dissolve with a soft popping that sounded absurdly like soda. The pumps whirred as ion flow became push. The barge took a hesitant step forward, like a blind animal learning to walk. Mara watched the flow meters. The pH at the reaction interface nudged in their favor. Barely. The wake behind them lost its cruel white edge and turned a milky green. Laminar for a meter, then eaten again, controlled death. Metered pain, the drive hummed. The capacitors filled. "Forward one," she said. Rook eased the guidance fins. The barge edged out, not skimming, not plowing, but being carried along the line that separated destruction from use. On the cliffs, a murmur. On the barge, a held breath extended into a second, then another. "Is this," Rook whispered, "what winning feels like?" "Winning is for later," Mara said. "This is the part where we don't die." They made 20 body lengths before the sabotage woke. The first sign was smell sharp, sweet, wrong. The second was foam, blooming too fast at the starboard aft, where a reagent line should have fed slow and steady. The third was a shudder through the hull, as a cluster of microrinds dissolved at once, starving the pump and dumping raw acid into a channeled Izegand for mix. Leak, Rook snapped, already moving. He slid across the deck, hands a blur as he slammed shut. Valvason jammed a stopper into. The foam crept up like a living thing, hissing into the seams. Intensified alkali, not theirs blossoming frammed wake. She tasted it like a memory of old lab accidents. Alkaline charge in the water, one of the tinkerers cried. Bombs! The guild's observers stood very still at the cliffs. Mara's mind did the math the way old soldiers do, threat-fast, ugly, precise. The added alkali wood speck foaming around their hull destabilized their laminar wake. Drive heat where they needed cool. It would make their barge a demonstration of exactly the failure the guild wanted to buy or bury. Dump starboard rinds 3 to 5, she ordered. Overfeed port drip by 2 increments. It'll make a mess, she said. Make this mess our mess. Rook pulled the releases. The starboard rinds loosened from their rails, slid free, and vanished into Theowake, dissolving into a cloud of chemistry that ate the worst of the alkaline, surged like a firebreak. Thepert drip overfed, making a localized pocket where the reaction ran hotter than design but stayed theirs. The wind on Vexar's southern rim always smelled of rust and lightning, a metallic sting that caught Inth back of the throat. Even the Goal analogs treated the surf with a predator's caution, riding air currents, fair above, and never letting their shadows skim too close to the waves. Captain Mara Ibarra stood at the cliff's edge, boots grinding against rock that had been etched into licework by centuries of corrosive spray. Beneath her, the ocean stretched to the horizon, a restless belt-off chemical fury that shimmered under twin suns. No oil-slick trail marked a recent crossing. Now disturbed the endless churn. The market stalls were sturdy, domed things, their awnings lined with neutralizing vents to keep the salt acid mist from eating through inventory. Traders hawked dried root meat and mineral tiles. Fisherfolk sold baskets of creatures hauled from safer, distant lakes. And always a few people stood staring east toward the impossible dot to the natives. The ocean was a prison wall. To Mara, it was an unopened door. She had first heard of it in the Union Transit Authority's Archiva note in some forgotten survey. Log: circumpolar acidic seas prevent east-west surface travel. Native peoples avoid open water. No viable. Recorded in millennia, consider for hazard training scenarios. To every official body, it was simply an immutable fact, filed and forgotten. But to Mara, Ibarra engineer, Captain, they aged differently squatting near the cliff. The child was alone, clutching a wooden toy boat so crude it was little more than a plank with 3 holes drilled in its base. It held the toy out over the edge, stared at Theoshian for several long seconds, and then pulled it back, shaking its head with the disgust of someone you already knew the moral of the story. Mara crouched down. "What's wrong with your boat, sailor?" The Vexari youth startled. They weren't used to humans speaking their language without the lazarism of tourist translators. "Boat is nothing," it said quietly, flexing its long fingers. "Ocean eats boats." "That's so." Mara tilted her head toward the churning horizon. "Maybe it's picky." "Picky?" The child gave the human a side-eye look, something between curiosity and suspicion. "I mean," Mara said, reaching into her field pack, "it eats everything you offer it, right? Metal, resin, stone, doesn't matter?" She pulled out a paper pouch. Inside were a few yellow spheres the size of large marbles, oxygen-cured citrus from agriculture pods she'd nurtured aboard ship. The child leaned closer, fascinated. "What's that?" "Lemon," Mara said, rolling one between her calloused fingers. "Where I come from, the ocean icen." Mean she broke off, because this wasn't an explanation you just gave. This was one you showed. Mara rose, found a flat patch of rock, and pulled a collapsible containment bowl from her pack. From beneath her pack came a sample vial scooped from the cliffs, that morning slate green. Liquid that stank off heat and metal. The child drew back instantly. "You mad," the child hissed. "Not yet." Mara set the bowl down, poured in a palm's worth of acid water. It began to steam against the alloy. Then, with exaggerated care, she dropped the lemon into the bowl. Reaction was subtle, faint fizzing, a dimming of the acidic smell. the birth of a cleaner scent like a rain, striking hot stone, and the liquid's furious boiling calmed just a shade. The child's ears flared forward again. "It drinks it," it said. "Neutralizes it," Mara murmured, watching the tiny bubbles of hydrogen work there. Slow alchemy. Acid plus base well, in this case, acid plus weak organic acid, gets you something else. Changes the fight. The child stared, and Mara realized she'd just committed the cardinal HFY mistakes. She'd let herself sound like she wanted to fight the ocean. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "That's not it. The ocean doesn't care about you. Maybe you needed to feed. It's something until it helped you move." That night in Kareth's human quarter, Mara studied everything she could, by barter or steal, about the acid ocean. Mineral composition charts, seismic vent maps, planetary pH variations over latitudes. She noted seasonal differences in acidity, spikes more pronounced where deep vents upwelled sulfur. Surface patterns determined, fishing conditions, and safe shore work. Other humans had studied it before, but never with her appetite. Union engineers had done the predictable things: build thicker hulls, coat surfaces in neutralizers, deploy massive shields. All had indebted the same weight of ocean, eating its prey from beneath, around, and within. The acid ocean always would, practically a proverb. Everyone accepted that truth. Mara came from a people whose history was mostly ignoring what everyone accepted. It wasn't arrogance. It was pattern recognition. Humans had crossed cold voids and crushing depths, not by overpowering the medium, but by bending to it, by making its traits the engine of their survival. Sailing ships had once followed currents instead of fighting. Rockets had once used gravitational slings to gain free velocity. Her mind worried at the problem the way a tongue prods a broken tooth. Acid wasn't an enemy. It was an untapped battery. She thought again of the fizzing lemon in the containment bowl and smiled. The next day, she returned to the cliffs, but not alone. A few curious human tech rats trailed behind, along with a pair of vexillary tinkerers who moved like they had already decided something was broken and needed fixing. She stood in the salt acid spray and addressed them all. "Everyone here knows. Nothing crosses this ocean," she said, loud enough for the wind to carry. "But tell me how many have tried to use it." A scoff came from the crowd. "You can't use a corrosion field," a human dockhand muttered. "It's death." "Death is wasted potential," Mara shot back. "That's an energy gradient out there, the size of a continent. You feed it. Redirect it to, don't fight it, and you sure as hell don't ignore it. You ride it." They stared at her like she'd suggested building a ladder to orbit. She didn't care. Like a recipe, and maybe even sails not cloth, but reaction surfaces that drew push from the sea's own hunger. The ocean hissed below, endless and waiting. For the first time since she'd arrived, Mara didn't see a wall,